Good afternoon. I'm Allyson Leacock, and this is our fourth session of the Public View. It's an opportunity when you have a chance to participate and make your input into the proposed Charter of Barbados. Today, we continue with our three sessions. We invite your comments and your questions today and again on Wednesday, and our final program on Friday. We start at 5 or thereabouts every evening and end around 6:30. As we meet virtually, we want to encourage you to call in. I don't think you might be able to WhatsApp or make your comments by Facebook today, since they seem to be offline for today, but you can still call 228-5562 or 228-5563. So get your fingers ready. These conversations are timely. Today, Barbados again made history by being the very first small island developing state to ever host the UN Conference on Trade and Development. UNCTAD 15 is here in Barbados, with global leaders recognizing the importance and the power of a small nation like Barbados. That's all about our boldness, our confidence, and indeed our courage to even bid to host a conference. That's inextricably linked with our sense of who we are. In other words, we've heard before, our mirror image, our identity. And this evening, we want to hear the views and examine that whole question of identity and our cultural confidence as we look at another exciting panel. To join us, I expect to be joined by my co-host, Julian Rogers, who is a Bajan that's very comfortable in his identity, but is also, I think, a man who has shared his identity across the Caribbean, like Black Stallions' famous Caribbean man. But joining us in the panel today with an opportunity for you to exchange views and for them to share theirs, of independent experts, with the RSTAC, the regional panel that has been set up to guide us through this process. So I think it's a good time for us to welcome the Caribbean man with Bajan roots and a very strong Bajan and Caribbean identity, Mr. Julian Rogers. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone joining us on CBC television and online, of course, on CGIS, Facebook, as well as CBC. Well, today's panel certainly is an opportunity for an exchange of views of independent experts with the committee's resident social commentator and the academics on matters of identity and cultural confidence. And let me start by introducing Dr. Don Marshall, and put D in the middle of that so as not to be confused with the Calypsonian. He's director of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, otherwise known as SALIS, the University of the West Indies Cayfield campus in Barbados. His current research projects focus on globalization phenomenon, offshore financial centers, scientific finance as a discourse, industrial policy issues and democracy and governance in the Eastern Caribbean, and wider than that. His special interest subject areas include cricket, calypso, soca, kaiso music, and its development and spirituality, and he can engage you for hours on that matter. He was appointed as a member of the UE COVID-19 Task Force in February 2020, another one of the distinguished members of the UE fraternity responding to the call. Adrian Greene is another member of the panel today. He's described as an arts educator, performer, writer, and visual artist. He's currently conducting research towards a PhD in cultural studies at UE. He already holds a master's degree in journalism, a bachelor's in advertising, and an associate degree in graphic design. Well, he spent 3 years with the Info Life program, helping to design an HIV educational course, which we presented to almost every class at almost every secondary school on Barbados. And as a spoken word artist, Mr. Greene has performed to audiences in Europe, North America, Africa, and the Caribbean, and he's produced 3 spoken word albums as well. He's an actor who's been featured in 3 films and a number of stage presentations as well. He has a weekly column published in the Sunday Sun. He's developed courses using poetry and spoken word as personal development vehicles. He's currently working on his first book, and he's also the co-founder of Iron Sharpen Iron. Greene has been instrumental in producing the longest running and most successful open mic show in this country. He's well known for his intellectual discourses, of course, in the areas of identity and cultural confidence, which is one of the matters we expect to deal with today. As an educator, Professor Bolden, joining our team, has taught for nearly 25 years and conducted workshops throughout the United States, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. He's regarded as a visionary whose focus is mainly on community and organizational capacity building, his main target areas being the African diaspora. His passion is looking out for the underserved and mobilizing essential, untapped, unrecognized, underutilized resources to promote well-being and needed changes at individual and community levels. He's conducted research and workshops on disengaged dads and HIV within the US and the Caribbean. Professor Bolden is the president and CEO of Universal Inspirations LLC and a grief recovery specialist as well. He's written children's books, developed a card game as a therapeutic tool to address grief and loss among children and adults. Finally, he enjoys writing poetry as well. So he will be calling in today as we draw on his expertise to focus on the matter of Indigenous leadership and community mobilization. Also joining or coming back to the panel is Dr. Derek Murray. The Center for Hybrid Studies in Barbados is his area of work, focusing on research and program development there. He also lectures at the University of the West Indies on Science, Technology, and Medicine in Society, Gender Studies, as well as African Caribbean traditional religions. He's a former director of the government's Barbados Commission for Pan-African Affairs. He's designed, established, and sat on the government's task force for reparations as well. And of course, you'll find that Dr. Murray wishes to touch on the matter of identity and much more as well. And also, would like to bring to your attention another member of the panel as we focus on these matters today, and that person is none other than our Sharita Granum, who is the co-chair of the Subcommittee on Rights and Freedoms, and another of the key members who's given unrivaled service to the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee. And it is with Sharita that I start today because we'd like to make a link between what happened last Saturday and what we're focusing on today. The matter of diaspora will come up again and again, no doubt about that, because there were some strong positions put on the table, particularly on behalf of the diaspora community by Ambassador Noah Lynch. But let us start by looking at the whole matter of identity, because it really is one that comes up very, very strongly in our discourse, and particularly when we look back at the speech made at the United Nations by the Right Honorable National Hero, Sir Walton Barrow, at that UN meeting where he represented Barbados as an independent nation. We keep hearing the mirror image and most importantly, the satellite, etc. But first, before we get to that, we've got a little something to share with you that comes right off the street from the public of Barbados.
I want to know, what kind of mirror image do you have of yourself? That is what I'm concerned about. What kind of mirror image do you have of yourself?
Do you really like yourselves? Because you can never really like anybody else unless you first like yourself.
There are too many people in Barbados who despise themselves, and their dislike of themselves reflects itself in their dislike of other people.
Well, 55 years later, the question we are asking ourselves is, are we satisfied with our reflection? Are we a confident nation? Are we ready to make new strides in the community of nations? Well, let's sample some of that confidence by bringing in Sharita Granum to set off the discourse today before we go to the members of the panel. Sharita, welcome.
Thank you so much, Julian, and good evening to you and Allyson, our very able and competent moderators for these virtual town hall sessions. Good evening to our esteemed panelists, and of course, good evening to our viewers and Barbadians at large, without whom none of this would be at all possible. So I, like you, I'm very excited to benefit from the perspectives of today's guest panelists on matters of identity, perception and confidence, and of course, how these things correlate to the matter of the proposed charter. As Julian referenced earlier, I think when we hear those words, many of us are taken back to those famous and often quoted mirror image words and quotes within the speech made by our national hero and first Prime Minister of Barbados, the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow. And I don't want to take up this time by attempting to give an analysis of those still very relevant words. But what I want to do is take this opportunity to remind us all of the multifaceted nature of identity and how issues related to, or even a lack thereof, if there even really is such a thing as no identity, how that can impact not only the way we see ourselves and how we are seen in the world that we exist in, but also how it impacts very tangibly on the decisions and the actions of our day-to-day lives. Identity is a very, very complex and intersecting matter, as are issues of visibility, representation, cultural confidence, self-esteem, and individual and national development. And they're all related in one way or the other. And I am eager to hear the analysis to be put forward by these very learned gentlemen on our panel today, and as well as the views and the feedback of the public on the matter of the charter. We're going to hear questions such as, who are we? Who do we want to be? And who do we need to be? Those are going to feature very prominently throughout the course of this evening's virtual town hall. And I sincerely hope that we are all able to approach the topic with an open, honest, and constructive mind, even if or when some of our quote unquote traditional ways of knowing and being are challenged. The fact of the matter is, not everything we have grown accustomed to actually serves our best interests in the context of building the Barbados that we want now and into the future. So without further ado, I am handing the reins back to our moderators as we get to the core of today's focus. Thank you.
Sharita, listening to you, I suddenly thought of something that may very well be a tool of communication in these circumstances. I don't know if you remember Satchmore and the Sand Pebbles putting out a tune that Satchmore so ably wrote, that I'm a Barbadian. I think I want to put that on the table, turntable in this case, for Dr. Derek Murray to use that as a platform for talking about this matter of identity. Are we Bajan? Do we recognize that we are Bajan and distinctive and whatever else? What else is required for us to take this big, bold step of moving and describing ourselves as a republic?
Well, that's an excellent place to start, because I think that we should always start with identity, because identity, as we were found to say in Pineland's Creative Workshop when I was with them, identity precedes participation. So we need to speak about identity. But before I jump into the heart of it, I want to bring a message from one of our sages with the Center for Hybrid Studies. We have a number of elders that we call sages that are associated with the center. This is, she's from the diaspora, the UK, living in Barbados now, working at the University of West Indies. This is Sister Dr. Sandra Richards. And she sent me a paragraph concerning speaking as the voice of the diaspora in part. And what she said speaks to the one of the paragraphs in the charter. This is the paragraph that speaks to the diaspora. We recognize the critical role that Barbadians by birth, by descent, by marriage, and by choice throughout the Barbadian diaspora have and continue to play in all aspects of national endeavor. And I want to serve as her voice, and certain that right to the committee formally on this, but she just wanted to signal that, and these are her words, the outcome of this critical development meaning this process for the Charter and the Republic. The outcome of this critical development in the status of our beloved Barbados holds significant implications, not just for the region and Barbados, but also globally. The diaspora feels a very deep connection to the Rock, as it is their home, notwithstanding the fact that many have felt disenfranchised on several levels. This development signifies a shift in many individuals and collectives in terms of where to locate their allegiance. This includes uncertainty about a place called home, identity, empowerment, domicile, citizen status, etc. And I start with that because I just wanted to signal that when we discuss identity, we're including the diaspora. And the diaspora is having difficulties or challenges in concretizing their identity and identifying with Barbados. And we should make sure that that challenge is one that we overcome in the future. Years ago, I don't remember how many years ago, I was invited by Queen's College alumni to discuss the question of what it means to be Bajan when it comes in particular to art and music. And so I contrasted Saturday night by Mad with some of the rock music that is lesser known, played by Barbadian bands, in order to discuss what it means to be Bajan. Now, you will find that once we try to discuss what it means to identify as a Barbadian, that we will run into all types of problems because we tend to want to have exclusive identities. So the challenge at the point in time that Queen's College was addressing in that discussion was, do we consider a rock band made up mostly of white young Barbadians playing anything but calypso, reggae, or spoon? Do we consider them to be Barbadian, and do we consider them their identity and what they identify with to be Bajan? And so that's something that we will have to grapple with. So I'll start with my own notion of what identity, how identities are made. I consider an identity to be a list of attributes that are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So it is entirely possible for me to be African plus Barbadian plus Black plus Risha follower plus male plus being from the Pine, all plus a former student of Ellerslie School. I add all of those things to make my identity, and none of them is necessarily exclusive to the other. None excludes the other, because there sometimes is an argument that says, I'm Barbadian and not African, as if being one necessarily rules out being the other. And I start with African, but it also applies to whether you are European heritage, Chinese heritage, Indian heritage. As long as we remember that we're a list of, our identities made up of a list of attributes, and we keep adding. So the issue of the notion of identity for me is additive. It's a sum. You just keep adding and adding and adding, and subtract only the bad things that we need to get rid of. So I'll open with that on my notion of identity and what it means.
Let me then bring Adrian Greene into this, who is very well known for focusing a great deal in the whole matter of identity and cultural confidence. Adrian, is there a reluctance on our part to accept that, for instance, we are majority African in our ancestry, etc., while other nations and other nationalities and other identities are very proud of that connection? And Unique.
I can't answer that definitively, Mr. Rogers. I think that whenever Africans were taken, there is that tension between Black identity and African identity to some extent because of the process of enslavement and colonization and mental enslavement. What I would say is that Barbados represents a very particular paradox. And I want to express that paradox in 3 stories. The first is from Winston James. And Winston James is a Caribbean scholar who describes Barbados as a paradox because it was the most literate, free-colored, enslaved population that emerged in the 19th century, and at the same time, the most repressive and conservative society in the post-emancipation period. He called it the Alabama of the Caribbean. So there's this paradox of a repressive, anti-Black society in the Caribbean with the most literate and well-educated Black communities in the Caribbean. First paradox. The second paradox comes in a story that is told by George Lamming. George Lamming, as a young man, took a trip to Jamaica, and being an avid cricketer and cricket fan, he asked a friend of his about George Headley. The friend happened to know George Headley and took him to see him. And in conversation with George Headley, he expressed to Mr. Headley how he thought that he was the greatest. And Headley said to him, no, he didn't consider himself the greatest. He considered Herman Griffith from Barbados to be the greatest cricketer. And as he explained it, when most of the other cricketers were uncomfortable in their Black skin, Herman Griffith from Barbados was a beacon of Black pride and pride in his Blackness and standing firm as a man amongst white men without cowering. This confused George Lamming. It was a paradox for him because he had hard run-ins with Herman Griffith in Barbados. As a schoolboy, he got the chance to play for Empire Cricket Club. I guess they were like scholarships, or schoolboys would come, poor schoolboys who would not normally get a chance to play club cricket were brought onto teams. And he tells the story of how in the middle of a game in front of hundreds of spectators, Herman Griffith came onto the field to send him off because he had not yet paid his yearly subscriptions. And his experience of Herman Griffith was a man that was totally unsympathetic to the Black masses around him. So here was this paradox again. Herman Griffith, who stood proud in his Blackness among the English, but at the same time was so harsh and demeaning to Black people who he considered of a class below him. The third story is a personal story. As you said in your introduction, Mr. Rogers, I had the chance to go to almost every single secondary school in the island doing HIV education, talking about stigma and discrimination. And at one school, after one of the sessions, a teacher said to me, Mr. Green, we had a little boy in this school who was HIV positive. And when he was in second form, his classmates found out. And those classmates kept his secret and took that secret with the class all the way through to fifth form. No one else in the school ever found out that this little boy was HIV positive. So when I went to other schools, I would tell the story, but I wouldn't tell them what school it was. So, school children, curious, they would say, Mr. Green, what school it was? I would say, I'm telling you. Not almost, with very few exceptions, maybe 3 exceptions, at every school that I told that story at, when I told them that I would not tell them what school it was, the children would say to me, Why you know that can't be here, sir? That will go be Harson's College or Queen's College, because these children here can't do that. They had an identity that was drilled into them through an educational process, which is the epitome of that paradox expressed by Winston James and in George Lamming's story in relation to Herman Griffith. So that is my long-winded answer of saying to you, I can't say that we embrace our African ancestry more or less than any other Black people in the diaspora. What I can say is Barbados has a particular identity issue which may be unique amongst all members of the African diaspora.
Thank you very much, sir. So that's your first over, and we look forward to bowling more later on as this match continues. But I'd like to get the spectators involved and remind you that it's very easy to do so. There's no charge, it's all free, and all you have to do is pick up that phone and call us at 228. Yes, you know the number now. I've said it so many times before. So you got 228-8826, 62 and 63. The 62 number, by the way, is the WhatsApp line, and I always advise that you use it because you don't have to wait, because you can always drop a voice note right there and we can share it. So get involved, and remember, this is your forum, the public view. Let's move the discussion along now and bring Professor Don Marshall in here. He, of course, has a strong interest in cricket as well, and calypso and soca and so on. So I don't know if you're going to stay on the cricket theme or whether you're going to work some calypso and soca into your response to this matter of what some people say is an identity crisis.
Well, if you language it like that, if you use that language, identity crisis, you could start thinking about the fact that we are in a values crisis, a values complex crisis. But if I could delve into a response stimulated by the rich insights that both Derek and Adrian and indeed yourself in your summaries, Julian, and Crystal, it is? I hope I have the name right.
Sharita.
Yes, Sharita, sorry. If I could just jump off where they have made interventions, I would wish to say identity and subjectivity are two things that go hand in hand. You know, it would be remiss of anyone to believe that you can that politics comes after the question of settling one's identity. In other words, to come up with a set of firm beliefs, viewpoints, and so on that you have about who you are, where you come from, where you wish to go, that essentially is a political project. That itself is the process of politics and the influences that politics has had in shaping your own consciousness and so on. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Now, to discuss identity, which is always mobile, and subjectivity, which is always emotion, I think we should, when we're looking at it from the Caribbean perspective, as others have alluded, is to begin to recognize trauma. Trauma for the 90% Black population in Barbados, arising out of the plantation and colonial experience. And the trauma delves deep into a sense of who you are and the fact that you were legally referred to, for the most part, as non-human. So if you're coming up with a question about identity, right there, you are pushed in the direction of always thinking what it means to be human. And what it means to be human at diverse conjunctural or various historical moments become an essential question for persons coming out of these former slavery, slave-based and colonial-based societies, what it means to be human. And so for the work for me, apart from some calypsos I can quote, but the work for me that I think is very critical is Austin Thomas Clarke's Growing Up Stupid Under the Union Jack. I think in many ways that text holds up that mirror image before the speech was intoned by Harold Barrow, His Excellency. That text opens up a kind of mirror image of who we are, who we were, I should say, pre-independence. So the symbolism behind independence and so on that Barrow and others brought about was important for building psychic confidence for people that never had a post-plantation healing, that have never come to grips with the tragic qualm of suffering, sadness, and silence. And that is a tragic qualm that befalls Black people here and everywhere across the diaspora. The fact that we've had that kind of ancestral experience and hangover, and it has been passed on generation to generation in the sense that we are always struggling to overcome efforts through discourse and the shaping of common sense around notions of Black degeneracy, notions of Blackness being a condition one has to constantly fight and struggle against white supremacist ideals to overcome. Our cricketers face constantly in the fines and the bans that they receive, they constantly go up against the white normative gaze for assessing their manhood and their personhood. And many of the calypsos that are written, it is not by accident that the calypsonians that are written, I'm talking about what we would call the social commentaries, are written with a profound sense of justice, a quest for justice, largely to do with the fact that Barbadians, Caribbean people coming out of that slavery experience have a profound desire for justice. Indeed, social justice is a basic tenet and principle of our governance structures. No matter what the IMF counsel is, no matter what neoliberal counsel is about the need for the state to roll back and be limited and so on and so forth, the state shouldn't be involved in the economy and the rest of it. There are some historical wrongs that have shaped and thwarted certain kinds of developments, logically unfolding developments of us as a region, as a people. And it is to the state that we look to provide that protective response and to proceed along the fight towards social justice. So our identities are wrapped up in struggles for freedom, and freedom, not necessarily freedom to, as much as freedom from domination and subordination. So you will find that existentially, we as a people, the way our identity works as a collective identity is in the struggle for justice in a very profound way. And this is why we sort of go against the grain of international policy development discourse when it asks for the promotion of private sector-led development and open market development. Not a single government in Barbados, ever since independence, even as they may express similar views and seem to be in consonance with counsel coming from the fund, that is the IMF or the bank, the World Bank, or indeed from international policy development discourse, has actually followed that notion to any slavishly, that is to say, because they recognize that the majority of people in the Caribbean, now this is Black and East Indian, come from a long tradition where the struggle to overcome coloniality in all its vestiges still remains a relevant struggle, still remains very pertinent. And this is where fights for reparatory justice falls and fits within. This is where struggles for deeper forms of democracy fit within. This is where the symbolism of taking down Nelson falls well within. This is where when our Calypsonians sing Masade Done, that's why it resonates with many people. This is when Rastafari stand up and say who they are. Rastafari has a song this year expressing an anti-vax position, but not born of social media assumptions by persons who are unscientific. It comes from a worldview that I don't have to share it, or you don't have to share it, but it's a worldview where they believe in the bodily sanctity of Black people, given the very tormented history of Black bodies being used to promote medicine and to promote understandings in gynecology and other forms and branches of medicine and health. Not this Rastafari is Rastafari's position. But where does that come from? It doesn't come from an anti-vax position. It comes from an understanding that in this space known as the Caribbean, the fight to overcome coloniality remains an enduring one, and one that has to be constantly re-articulated because of the way in which forces congealing to repress, hold back, and stifle democracy, stifle goals towards Black people building up intergenerational wealth. The forces that act against those have to be constantly resisted. So I will just end my intervention here by saying, when we're talking about post-pandemic transitions, post-pandemic futures, when we're talking about getting past lockdowns or what kinds of economy and societies we want to build, that central question of what it means to be human in the Caribbean small island state space becomes critical. Our identities are going to be fed through into the shaping of that. And certainly one critical dimension of that will be, how do we overcome coloniality? How do we respect each other as human beings? And obviously questions about trust, trust, accountability, and the rest of it that leads to better governance will also be a part of it. But it is Jermaine Arrowbarrow, the late Arrowbarrow, did touch a chord when he did give the mirror image speech. But the mirror image speech, to my mind, is just simply an echo of Tom Clark's growing up stupid under the Union Jack, and the injunction for us under the broken trident, or certainly under post-independence Caribbean, is to reimagine futures that are going to be about giving rise to a new economic class, giving rise to new entrepreneurial expressions, giving rise to what citizenship should mean in the fullest sense.
Thank you, Professor, for reinforcing the tools of the trade, so to speak, that we can draw from the Calypsonian, who is our newscaster of many decades reputation. Sharing the moderating role with me today is Allyson Leacock, who takes it over from here with a call to action from you.
Indeed, we invite you to call us on 228-5562 or 228-5563. We're ready to take your calls and have you make your views heard as we engage with this panel that has very clear perspectives on national identity and how that really feeds into a lot of the expressions captured in the draft charter that are open for discussion today, on Wednesday, and again on Friday. I think it's a good time for us to also remind and link to the discussion on Saturday, when we had some perspective from the diaspora, and when we come back and we hear some other views on the streets of Barbados, we'll have a look at the role of identity with members of the diaspora. But for right now, let us hear from Barbadians on the street here in Barbados.
Yes, I think I have grown to be more confident in my mirror image, understand a little more who I am now as I've grown to become an adult. So yes.
We can do better. We're really reactive as a people. We're not proactive. We wait till something happens and then do something afterwards. But yeah, I wish we could change our overall image of ourselves.
Like, I'm sure like everybody else, there are days where it's like, don't look at me today, right? But yeah, for the most part, I do.
Definitely I do, but there's always room for improvement.
When you hear American and you look at other Americans and you see that you're not relating to them, for me, that's been a soul searching experience. And honestly, it led me back to, my home physically, and, what is literally like my home lifestyle with Barbadians, whether it's at my house here in New York or here in Barbados.
Yeah, I love being Barbadian. What it represents in different areas in the world can be changed, but I like being Barbadian. It's not bad.
I love most things Bajan. I'm a bred Barbadian. I think there's a lot in our culture and so forth that we have. So yes.
I definitely do. I love to travel and going to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and hearing people say, yeah, Bage. It makes me feel really, really good.
Good. There are a lot of feel-good factors about who we are, where we are, and where we want to be. And so this conversation about the draft charter is intended to have your input on that charter. What does it really mean for you? It's the precursor to the much larger discussion that will follow in the beginning of 2022 on the Constitution in all its facets. But make no mistake, we're at the point now where we want to address some of the values and the basic tenets on which any constitution might be reviewed and rebuilt. And in that regard, it is important for us to be able to know who we want to be. So this journey towards becoming a republic is part of that. And of course, there's always a conversation about those in the diaspora and how they navigate identity. How is national confidence affected when you live abroad? We have expressions and observations about the differences in how we all live, whether it is in the UK or Canada or in the US, and how that impacts on gravitate to each other in our West Indian communities abroad. But after living abroad and returning to Barbados, is there a conflict of identity? Is there a loss or a change in identity, in our national confidence? These are questions that I think I would like us to explore at this point. Do we have a disconnect when we return in terms of our brotherhood as a people, with Barbadians living here and Barbadians in the diaspora? We know they said that you went away, you feel you come back and you know everything. So what is that disconnect? What are the links with our identity? And where does that leave us? And I think we have a caller from the diaspora, Professor Errol Bolden, who I know feels strongly about the need for Indigenous leadership and community mobilization. And he may have his own expectations about what this charter can capture with his contribution. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Professor Errol Bolden on the line. I think he's joining us via Zoom. Professor Bolden, welcome.
Thank you so very much, and welcome, colleagues. Now, I first would like to begin by saying that I live this whole identity, what I call an identity evolution, because it is dynamic. And let me explain why I say this. As you could hear from my accent always make for folks question my identity. I was born in Trinidad of Barbadian parents. I went to elementary school at St. Lawrence Boys School, and then the Unique High School. I left Barbados in 1984. Went to Idaho, where it was 0.001% Black. So obviously that was a challenge to the identity, and then went to the place that was called Chocolate City, Howard University, Washington, D.C., to attend Howard University. But I see myself as Trinidadian born, culturally Bajan, and because I've worked in various African countries, I also see myself culturally African as well. Being in the US does present an interesting scenario, especially in these times, because a dominant identity for me in the United States is my recognition of myself as a Black male, because that represents so many challenges to others, and by extension, a challenge to me. At the university where I'm employed, I currently serve as the chair of the Black Male Task Force, interestingly enough. But during the workshops and symposiums and different things that we have, and during my dialogue with some of my other colleagues and with students, again, you have to address this whole issue of identity. As previously stated, sometimes I identify heavily, primarily as a Black male. Sometimes I'm given the label as African American. Other times, because of my accent, as West Indian or Caribbean. Sometimes, especially when I say certain words, as Bajan. Other times as Trini. Other times as Trini Beige. So when I taught in South Korea or in Ethiopia, I've been to South Africa, the question about where are you from or who are you always comes up. And so I've learned to say I'm an international man. But make no mistake, being born of Barbadian parents, although I was living in Trinidad, I clearly identified from the time I knew myself as Bajan. And so that is my dominant identity. Many say that you've lived in the United States for almost 40 years and your accent is still heavily Caribbean. And I quickly tell them yes, and I'm very proud of that and the rich heritage that I have. Now, the question about whether when you return home, if there is some conflict, I would say yes. Although I have lived in the United States for almost 40 years, I come home on an average of every twice a year. And I also interact via Zoom with a lot of folks, whether it's in the educational arena or in the faith community. So I'm one who is very connected to the landscape in Barbados. And during discussions, the whole issue of identity tends to surface in different ways. I remember a close friend of mine got into what was a rather heated discussion because I have had a shirt which said, I'm Black and I'm proud of it. And he got really angry with me and said that he's so tired of us in America always talking about Black this and about Black that. And I had to say, unless you lived my experience and walk in my shoes, you may not be able to understand why this is important to me. And at different points in time, so I love wearing African outfits. This is one of the more traditional African garb that I wear. one, but I would normally wear the more contemporary, I should say. I normally wear the more traditional ones, but I have a variety of them. And so when I wear them at home, meaning Barbados, it usually invokes some conversations. One person said, "Oh, Dr. Bolden is wearing his pajamas because I had a long outfit." And so when I kept telling her, I said, this is ideal for our weather. This is the kind of clothing that we in the Caribbean should wear. It's comfortable and keeps us cool. Then she proceeded to tell me that her mother is a Bajan, her grandmother is a Bajan, her great-grandmother is a Bajan, and so she is not African. There's no need for her to identify with the African culture. But let me transition into what I personally see as variables that tend to impact what I would say both negatively and sometimes positively, the whole notion of identity. Age. One could argue now that there's a greater openness among many of the younger folks to explore their roots. It is not that at one point in time when we hear they're back to Africa, we would mainly think that is the Rastafarians thinking about going to Sheshemeni in Ethiopia. But there's an openness now with social media and what's not. A lot of the myths, a lot of the stereotypes have been addressed. But I must say it's not only with the younger folks, because I have some older cousins that I am so happy to see that when they get excited about even wearing the African clothing and finding out a little bit about my African experiences, it really does warm my heart. And you can see somewhat of a transformation as far as a fuller appreciation of their identity as far as the roots are concerned. Religion also impacts the whole concept of identity. Gender, males or females, or even their gender orientation are some of the things that we still struggle to address. The place of residence. For instance, when I lived in Idaho, the whole issue of what Barbados is, and is it part of Jamaica, and do all women still wear grass skirts and eat bugs? Those were the questions that were asked about our identity, and obviously it angered us some. And then when we went to Washington, D.C., obviously to Howard University, that's considered the Black Mecca. So it was a different experience. So place of residence also impacts our identity. And crises, the killing of George Floyd, made a lot of us examine our Blackness. And you see how the Black Lives Matter movement not only became a concern for the US, but globally. And so I want to leave you with this, in that, in my opinion, identity can be very fluid at times and be contingent on what the issue that you're confronting is.
Thank you so much for your passionate intervention, and very relevant to a number of the issues that we raised a few on Saturday as we spoke about members of the diaspora and their role in this conversation about the draft charter. What do you see as one of the critical dimensions that you'd like to have included in this charter, specific to the people in the diaspora, Barbadians in the diaspora?
There is a concept called cultural humility. And just in case, if I may just give the working definition that I use, and cultural humility is described as the process of reflection and lifelong inquiry. It involves self-awareness of personal and cultural biases, as well as awareness and sensitivity to significant cultural issues. As we become more open to seeing ourselves as global citizens, it is important that we make some commitment to a lifelong learning where there is maybe a paradigm shift in how we thought about others. We cannot simply look at social media. As several of my younger students say, they get their news, their information about the world and everything from social media. Social media itself does not tell the complete story. So it's important that we engage in robust discussions about what diversity and inclusion means, because they're buzzwords that you hear throwing all around the place. But when the rubber meets the road and we sit down and we really understand who someone is and what he or she represents, it may conflict with some of our deeply held values. And so being at a place where we can exercise cultural humility and allow ourselves to be open to that learning process is one thing that I see is critical in our evolution at this time.
So thank you. I want to bring in Dr. Derek Murray, because we were looking at this matter in a very broad sense as well on Saturday, and the matter of how the diaspora navigates that identity. You obviously have, you're very grounded, but for others it may not be as straightforward, or they may not have that confidence. So how is that element of national confidence affected by those who are living abroad, and how do you counter it? I'd like to invite Dr. Murray to feed into this, and then perhaps you can have an exchange as well, Professor Bolden, with him on that matter.
All right, thank you, Allyson. The question of confidence, I want to start with the question of self-esteem and then leading to confidence. And I want to start in an unusual place where most people don't start with questions of self-esteem and confidence. We usually look to scientific or sociological or political analyses or frames or lenses through which to analyze this whole notion of identity, self-esteem, confidence, and so on. But I want to start with beauty. And I want to start with beauty because I believe that that's fundamental both to survival, whether human beings or any other creature. And that beauty leads into self-esteem and confidence in human beings. And this is the position of the number of philosophers who hold the position that fundamental to our existence is the notion of beauty. Alfred North Whitehead, for example, more recently a neurologist / philosopher, Mark Soames, and they have the notion that feeling and beauty is at the base of our survival instincts. So I want to start with beauty because it is our treatment as children, even before we're born, our notions of beauty, which then lead to issues of self-esteem and identity and self-confidence, then national self-confidence, national confidence. So to disentangle beauty, the things that we find beautiful, we include. And the things that we find ugly, we exclude. And this is linked to values, of course, because the things that we find valuable, we include. The things that we find not valuable, we exclude. Apart from including them, once we've included things, then we give the things that we find more beautiful priority, and the things that we find ugly less priority. So when a Black child is born, And the language around that black child speaks about their hair in derogatory terms, the color of the skin in derogatory terms, the size of the nose in derogatory terms. Every single thing about the natural body of that child is spoken of in negative terms because we do not find them beautiful. We find them to be ugly. Then we speak those things, and by the time the child is 5 years old, 8 years old, it has internalized that everything that the child knows first and foremost, which is its body, has been found to be ugly. And that is the first line of attack on our self-esteem and our identity. Nobody wants to identify with what is ugly. You want to identify with what is beautiful, hence the notion of the white ideal of beauty. So that straight hair, light skin, straight nose, those are the things that we find beautiful and that we embrace. Now, last time I was on the panel, I spoke of Marimba Annie and her notion in the book Yurugu, that we have adopted and should be rid of the dirty habit that every time we see something, a difference between two things, we're not contented to just leave them as different. We must also decide that one is better than the other. We must also have a hierarchy. So somebody is not black and one white, and there's just a question of difference. One must be better than the other in our minds. Somebody just doesn't have straightened hair or curly, kinky hair, and that's a difference. And we accept them and embrace them, particularly because they're different, and difference brings diversity and excitement. No, we must then decide that one is better than the other. I think that this is at the base of the problem that we have with identity. Whether we're here or we're in the diaspora, in many ways it is exacerbated in the diaspora, because in Barbados, with the majority black population, if you have a black child, you could at least for the moment hide or pretend as though these differences and this hierarchy and the white ideal does not exist. Except that the moment you watch television and the moment you leave this country, you're immediately exposed to what it means to be black and inferior. In fact, some ways being in Barbados protects you to a large extent. The first time that Amir was raised in Barbados, in my entire life until I was 16 years old when I went to Canada, Vancouver to live, I only knew one white person. That was my excellent chemistry teacher, Susan Chinnery. At the time, she was married. So I knew her and her husband, the only two white people that I knew. And they were both excellent to me. So I had no reason to have an issue with whiteness. But I would tell you I'm no different to any other black child that came up thinking that lighter skin and straight hair would have been more beautiful. The first time I was ever called a nigger was in Canada by a young military officer in the back of a bus waving at me at a bus stop and calling me a nigger. And then my second experience with explicit overt racism would have been in Manchester, where I would be by the bus stop after the nightclub, and the taxis would pass me and my wife, straight the white students. Except that there was this one black taxi driver who drove around at night picking up people like myself. So this issue of identity and the exacerbation of this notion of beauty in places other than Barbados and the diaspora and so on, I well understand, but I want to ground this notion of beauty and values as something that we should point to taking a place of prominence in the Charter, because the notion of beauty and values are not going to easily find their way into the Constitution. And as I said last time I was here, the Charter should really address those gaps that the Constitution will not tackle. So the reason that we have issues of identity and so on coming out of beauty, the notion of beauty, is something that needs to be explicitly addressed since it will not be addressed in the laws. And one final point I want to end on, the poets, our poets, and I would love for Dr. Margaret Gill to address this, the committee on the issue of leadership and so on, but as an intellectual, but more so as a poet. And I'm glad that Brother Greene, Adrian Greene, is here, because I believe that poets, as a shorthand for artists in general, should be given prominence in the Charter, because it is the poets and the artists who are sensitive to changes in the society that lead us to become less human. The poets, the calypsonians, the artists, and so on, are the ones who cultivate and nurture a sensitivity that then acts as a barometer for when we're becoming less than human. And we should use them in the same way that we use the gas gauge in a vehicle to make what would normally be invisible visible, what would normally be ineffable seeable, visual, and improve our sensitivity, make us sensitive to those moments where we end up being less human than we're supposed to be. We're not, just because we have human genetics and DNA, it does not mean that we are genetically determined to become automatically human. Being human is something that we work on culturally every day, and something that we need indicators to keep us on the road to becoming more human. I will end with one clear example of which I'm very proud to be Barbadian at this moment, in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of a crisis, where our government has said in no uncertain terms that the Black body, for reasons that Professor Don Marshall has just elaborated on, the Black body is sacrosanct, and unless we have an existential crisis that threatens the majority of lives with death in this community, we will not infringe the rights of Black Barbadians. That particular position needs to be enshrined in the Charter, and this particular moment is particularly telling. And it was preceded, apart from the marches and so on that we had, it was preceded by Rastafari and the artists making us sensitive to the fact that we should not go in that direction.
Thank you, Derek. I am glad that you raised the matter of the role of our spoken word artists, because Adrian is not only a spoken word artist. We know him as a social commentator, an artivist, and he really is in many ways our conscience. So I would want him to weigh in at this juncture on the implications as well for our creatives, because so often we really see our artists as tangential and purely for entertainment purposes, as opposed to being the conscience of who we are as a people and a central part of our identity. So Professor Bolden, bear with me. I know I did say that I was going to invite an exchange between you and Derek, but I think it's central for and apropos for Adrian to come in at this juncture. Remember
Thank
to
you, Allyson.
unmute, Adrian.
And I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Go right ahead.
This is linked to my original comment about the Barbadian society. And this is the fact of the matter is that the arts is the area that people, black men and women, were allowed to dominate and to express themselves in and to take over from the very beginning. And the black artist has been the standard bearer, the flag bearer for black consciousness, for black identity, black issues, and the voice of the people across societies, and Barbados is no different. However, due to that paradox, that tension that I spoke of in my earlier presentation, we have a kind of schizophrenic or double consciousness when it comes to the artist. We revere the artist in Barbados. We pay lip service to the artist in Barbados. We recognize the contribution of the artist in Barbados, while at the same time downplaying it, marginalizing it, and pushing the artist to the side when we have serious things to discuss and serious matters to attend. But the artist is central in shaping the identity of a people. Not only shaping the identity of a people, but reflecting the identity of a people. So yes, it is great if that segment of Barbados, the political class, the administrative class, the professional class gets together and put together a document, speak amongst themselves about what they would love to see, the Barbados that they would love to see. But that document will never ever be as strong as the expression of what Barbados is or could be by a mighty Gabby, or a red plastic bag, or a TC, or a mole, Chief Ding. It will never resonate like those statements will. And this double consciousness that we have in Barbados, this ism and schism that we have, is a serious impediment to the shaping of coherent and strong Barbadian identity. And this transition to the Republic, this transition to a Barbadian head of state, some people call it a completion of Aaron Barrow's process, but I don't call it a completion. It is just another step. Because until we address this paradox in Barbadian society, this double consciousness, and in fact it may be beyond double, there are many Barbadoses, this schizophrenia in Barbadian society. And we embrace the role of art and the role of artists as fundamental to shaping Barbadian and reflecting Barbadian identity. We're going to have a very difficult task.
We sure have started the process, and I think we have to really continue that conversation. Professor Bolden, I had asked to stay on. Do we still have him on the line? If he has any final words before we go to Julian to take up the second segment. Professor Bolden, final thoughts on this particular area?
Yes, actually, on both comments, as was said during my introduction, I do a lot of inspirational writing. In fact, during this time, there was an explosion in that I am about to produce my 7th book for this year. And although my professional training is both in public health and social work, both which are very critical for these times, whether you look at what's going on with the pandemic or whether you look at what's going on with the racial tensions and identities. But it is actually my poetry, my creative downloads that have been most impactful in contributing to the well-being of a wider segment of folks, not only here at my university and the Baltimore, Maryland community, but because a lot of the book launches were done virtually, it also had a significant impact on the Barbadian community. So I echo the sentiments as far as the role or the significant role that the artists in general, including the spoken word artists, can contribute to the current landscape. Take us, because we do operate as the conscience of the people and find a way of saying things what others think and feel, but may not know exactly how to say it. So I echo those words. But I must give credit to the rich grounding provided by my parents. And because they took us back and forth from Barbados to Trinidad several times based on my dad's work as a building contractor, the whole experience about moving to a different place and for a little while and connecting with a different culture was something that was seeded in me quite early. And so there's a richness that you get when you expose yourself, immerse yourself in a different culture and allow yourself to come out of your comfort zone to put yourself in another person's shoes, so to speak. Now, my professional training also has allowed me to be very introspective. And it's that introspection that has allowed me to experience significant growth as far as my identity is concerned. So the push for Bajans in general to take some time and be very introspective and allow themselves to be exposed to different communities beyond what social media offers is very critical.
Thank you very much, Professor Bolden, for joining us via Zoom with your contributions. And I hand over now to my co-host, Julian Rogers.
Well, we got just 5 minutes left, and I'm going to ask for the impossible here, which is to ask a few of you to make very short, tight closing comments. And I'm going to go to Professor Marshall first of all. You get to, I don't know, we call this the death over, so to speak. I'm sure you can handle it.
Yeah, I just briefly would say rich discussion. When I made my contribution, I spoke of the importance of Tom Clark's "Growing Up Stupid Under the Union Jack" as a way as my way of launching into the discussion. I think we've come to the point where we recognize that a healthy public sphere is important for the further deepening of democracy and development of the identity of the country and of many in terms of a push towards a deeper social democracy, a deeper economic democracy, and so on. I think it's important that in mentioning artists that we also create, because I think that's the thrust of Adrian's point, we must create conditions where freedom of expression is will move beyond simply lip service, and that we would really be a society that will welcome critical engagement across all spheres. And I think that's crucial to the whole question of who we are and how we advance the interests of those under the rubble, including and those that also that may feel that they too have a right to be heard. But it's important that all are heard and heard in the context where we live in a society that is open, free for critique and public discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor. Adrian, you are up next. The crossed over, so you're there.
Really quickly, I'd like to say, as I said before, this is another step in the process, and what has happened to us as a people was a stripping down. Slavery and colonization was cultural genocide. What we have been charged with doing is rebuilding ourselves culturally, which is rebuilding identity. And this is an organic process. The legislation, the policies are a part of it. But then those things have to be written on to the people. They have to come from the hearts of the people. So it is a multifaceted process. It is difficult in this age of social media when each of us has the ability to share within a particular bubble of a screen and a few websites or our favorite Instagram page or whatever. It's the task that I believe that we must on, and that I really commend the government for having the privilege this particular step.
And our team captain, Sharita, with the final word.
Thank you. It's been such a privilege to benefit from the richness of this type of engagement and conversations. And it's precisely this type of engagement that was anticipated when the charter was proposed. I know I keep warning you, these are going to be unvarnished conversations. They're going to force you to confront a lot of prejudices and a lot of uncomfortable truths. And I am sure that we have delivered on that today. But it has been so constructive. Notions of the need to recognize trauma within our experience of slavery and colonialism in order to be able to adequately question identity. These concepts of and notions of freedom and justice, as well as beauty and values, as so eloquently expressed by all of our panelists today and our contributors. Thank you so much. And certainly the symbolism of taking down Nelson, elevating a Barbadian to the office of head of state, and replacing the Queen of England. And I would add, this very proposed charter are inextricably linked to the notion of decoloniality, as so well articulated by Professor Don Marshall, who I forgive for not remembering my name earlier. Him and Adrian share a certain level of local celebrity status that I do not. So I forgive you, sir. But thank you all very much for your amazing and invaluable contributions to this discussion around the power of representation, visibility, and what informs the way that we construct our identities and build from there. I think this has been very rich. I run the risk of being repetitive, but you will forgive me for that. And I've said this at the beginning, and I will likely repeat it a few more times after this. We've gotten here because of you and your engagement and contributions. Please continue to engage with us. We are going to close the open call for submissions to our stack on the 7th of October, but that still gives you plenty of time to get your contributions in. And as ever, I look forward to your continued participation and engaging with you all, and extend my sincerest thanks on behalf of our stack to the people of Barbados. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Sharita. And of course, let me tell you that we'll roll the wicket again and come back on Wednesday at 5 o'clock, where you're invited not just to be the audience in residence, but most importantly, to participate in every form that's available to you. Thanks to our panel, and thank you to my co-moderator, Allyson Leacock, and to the team at CBC and at the GIS. I'm Julian Rogers, wishing you a very good evening.